Hi, my name is Michael. I ran a webinar for my friends over at Reddit, RSAT. You guys are great. I thought it might be helpful to go through some of my strategies that I've worked out on the verbal section. I don't do math, but I do the verbal, so I want to do what I can to help you guys out on this. So we ran the live session on Saturday. This would be November 15th, I think it was, or the 14th. I guess it's November 14th. I think I mixed up that date in the email, but anyway, if you missed it, I apologize for that, but here we go. What I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna kind of recreate the ideas we went through and go over for you the core strategies, and hope this will be helpful for you. Okay, so I'm gonna bring up test 10 on my tablet here so I can write with my pen, and we can look over some of the strategies by doing a couple of the passages live together. Okay, here we go. Okay, so this is test 10 writing and language test. This is 35 minutes, 44 questions. Forget the number of questions, it's 4 passages, so 35 minutes divided by 4 is about 8.5 minutes per passage. That's what we need to be paying attention to. You really got to get through these within that time. So if there's, remember, the easy, medium, and hard differentiation that the SAT does is not necessarily per question, but per passage. Some questions on an easy passage can be hard or medium, but usually they'll bulk up the hard questions on a more difficult reading passage. So you just want to be careful about that and make sure that if you need one passage that'll take you 10, 11 minutes, make sure you're getting through the easy passages in 6, 7 minutes so you don't fall behind. Be sure you're always in your practice, you're working on paper, you're using a bubble sheet, you're using a distraction-free environment on a table, hopefully with a clock on the wall or a digital clock on the computer, and no distractions, and you're not practicing tired. We want to practice for test day. So I have no problem with Khan and all that stuff, especially in the writing section. I think Khan is really useless for the reading because you need to be doing the reading on paper. The writing a little more able to do digitally, as you'll see here. The math, all good, but that's enrichment, not practice. Be sure to make the distinction between enrichment, which is just engaging in some sort of topic and getting better at it, and practice, which is mimicking test day. Super important. Okay, so we pick up the writing section, and again, we have 8.5 minutes more or less to get through each of the 4, not 44 questions, but the 4 passages. Now, you're not going to read this ever again, but let's just make sure we're clear on what they're asking us to do. So for some questions, you'll consider how the passage might be revised to improve expression of ideas. What they're really asking for is for precise and concise language. So precise means you're not wordy, you're being direct, you're not losing focus. Concise means, again, you're not wordy, but you're also being clear in what you're saying and you're not using too many words to say the same thing. So we're looking for precise and concise language. And then for other questions, consider how the passage might be edited to correct errors in sentence structure, usage, or punctuation. This could include logic, and we have grammar, and of course we have punctuation, okay? And that's the things that are really good to get through on the writing section for improvement is to know the rules. I see a lot of kids who can get an answer correct, but they can't tell me why. They're just used to it. They say, oh, I just understand the language. Okay, that's cool. But when you get tripped up on a question that's difficult, or a passage that's difficult, if you don't know the rule, you might lose on it. So I want to make sure you know the rules for why you're getting the questions right, and then using those rules to avoid questions wrong, okay? Now, one thing here, they always say this, after reading each passage. I have no idea why they tell you to read each passage, but whatever, we don't need to do that. We do want to preview the passages. So sometimes like there'll be no questions here on this first thing, the way they format this thing, because they mess around with format so much. If there's no questions here, you still want to read it, okay? You gotta get a sense for what's going on here. But above all, make sure you're hard reading, what I call hard read the titles, because this will answer a couple questions. And I'll show you this right now, how this works, okay? How a Cat in Hat changed children's education. Now, you may not have any prior knowledge about the Cat in the Hat. I think most people do, most kids do. Cat in the Hat is that stupid, I hated it when I grew up, but it's that stupid cat with that big old hat, and by Dr. Seuss, and they tell us right here. But just by looking at the title, I know that this is about how this picture book for kids change children's education? So watch how this can answer two questions. I'm going to go to question number 2 here. Okay, so keeping in mind the passage is about how what? How a cat in a hat changed children's education. Which of these is focused on children's education? Interesting since an individual sense of wholeness? No. Interesting since learning starts with failure? No. Interesting because journalism? No. Now I've eliminated A, B, and C, therefore D is what I'm left with. I don't know if I can maybe I need to read it a little bit, but I know that it's not A, B, and C because these each have an error in them. Remember, we're eliminating for errors, we're not isolating the right question. So yeah, sure, drawings like those are the wonderfully imaginative geniuses among children's illustrated. It's an illustrated book for children, so okay, we'll go with it. Now watch this. Usually the title will be really helpful. The last question in these passages here, number 11. We have the concluding paragraph here, and they want to write a conclusion that restates the main themes of the passage. Remember, the main theme of the passage, we don't have any little, background information, but we know the main theme from the title, How a Cat in a Hat Changed Education. So I look at number 11 and I say, all right, is it about limited vocabulary and appealing word choices? No, it's not about writing at all. It's about how a stupid cat changed children's education with a picture book. Impressive worldwide sales? No, it's not about the sales. Enduring ability to delight children, engage them in learning how to read. Okay, I can't eliminate that. Important role in the history of illustration. It's not about the history of illustration. I got to go with C. Again, what I've done here is that I've eliminated the wrong answers. I've fallen back on the correct answer here, solely based upon the title of the passage. Now, we do want to read this stuff anyway, and we don't have to do a really hard read like you would on the reading passages, but we do want to know what's going on here, okay? And then so let's go through, and I want to identify the rules that we're going to apply in here. But before we get to it, let me just go over some of those grammar and punctuation rules so we're really good on this. The first thing is that a sentence is consisting of a subject, a verb, and object, okay? And a subject and a verb and object must not be separated from each other by any punctuation. You cannot separate a subject and a verb with a comma, or a subject and a verb from an object with a comma. But that's because subject and verb and object are what we call a independent clause. They stand as a sentence unto themselves. So this should be object here. Sorry about that. Let me get that, subject, verb, object. But we can introduce dependent clauses by saying, a prepositional phrase, on Tuesday, blah, 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 I went to the store, okay? But we can also say on Tuesday, I, needing new clothes, comma, went to the store. So we could add additional information here. So the idea here is that every subject starts with a subject, a verb, and an object. We cannot separate them with a comma, and this is going to happen all the time because you can't separate a subject from a verb with a comma, but you can separate it with two commas because that becomes a parenthetical phrase or additional information that is descriptive or adding into it that's not a requisite phrase or necessary for the subject and the sentence and the verb to make sense. So we'll see how that plays out, okay? So we have our independent clause, which is subject, verb, and usually with an object. A dependent clause does not stand as a sentence by itself. Good on that, right? So how do we combine these? And commas do a couple things. Commas combine an independent clause with a dependent clause, right? So this is a clause that doesn't stand as a sentence by itself, but we combine it with a comma. Commas also combine two independent clauses, but they must have a conjunction. So if you look on the sentence question and you have an independent clause on one side and one on the other, and all you have is a comma, to answer because it requires an and, but, therefore, whatever, and it requires a conjunction. I think your teachers all call it fanboy. I hate that, by the way. That just gives me a headache, just like the cat in the hat. But anyway, so if you combine two independent clauses, you need to have a conjunction along with a comma. And by the way, you can do dependent clause, comma, independent clause, it doesn't matter. Now, commas do one other thing. Commas act like parentheses. I spell this out above here. Parentheses are additional information that is not necessary to make sense of the sentence, but is it adding a definition or adding context to the sentence. So commas can also act like parentheses. So like I said, Steve, my best friend, plays soccer. and that's parenthetical, Steve, my best friend, plays soccer. And I can also do it with a dash, by the way. Steve, my best friend, blah, 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 plays soccer. So I have subject, verb, separated from each other by 2 commas, 2 parentheses, or 2 dashes. And we'll talk about how dashes work in just a little bit, okay? So let's work on now the next thing, which is semicolons here. Okay, so we got commas down. Semicolons are basically the same thing as a period. You need an independent clause on both sides. So periods here, let's just do that. Periods separate sentences, and sentences must be able to stand alone to be separated by a period. Now, what's the difference between a semicolon and a period? Well, a semicolon is combining 2 independent clauses, or 2 independent sentences, if you will, but it's doing it in such a way as to bring them together to make larger meaning in some sort of attachment. It's not necessarily contrast, it's not necessarily a comparison or together. It's just somehow juxtaposing 2 independent clauses. But the key for this test is that an independent clause is separated from another independent clause by either a semicolon, a period, or a comma and a conjunction. Period. That's the rule here, okay? Just get that one down. Now, we have, I missed here, we need to add colons here, okay, and dashes. I didn't do a good job of writing out colons, but we'll talk about that in here. We know what periods do. So a colon is a way of setting off information, okay? And colons basically are saying, well, here's blah, 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 blah. There must be an independent clause. It must have a subject, verb, and often an object. And then we can say anything. Usually we have a list, or we have an example, or we have some other information. It could be an independent clause, could be a dependent clause, could be just a set of words. It doesn't matter. But we must have an independent clause prior to a colon. Now, dashes do the same thing as a colon. Now, remember, I said dashes can work like parentheses. They can also work like a colon. So you need to have an independent clause, dash, and then some information. Usually it's like an example is the typical use of a dash, but you must have that independent clause before the dash, as you do with a colon. Now we'll get into some of these other things which I've listed here, which are, sorry, I missed putting in here colons. But remember, I think we're good on that. Periods, determinants, and requisite phrases. We're going to go over these a little bit just to preview it. So determinants are words that define something. They're generally the word that, or the. That's expressing a particular thing. So pay attention to those. And how they create requisite phrases. In other words, something that is necessary to make the sentence make sense. I went to the store that was open. So that's important for that sentence to make sense, because just going to the store doesn't tell the reader much. I went to the store that was open is a requisite phrase. Therefore, I have no punctuation. I went to the store. No punctuation separating them, because it's all requisite phrases. We also have subordinate clauses and subordinating conjunctions, and we'll talk about that a little bit. Just basically what this is a word like because or since. If you put that at the beginning of a sentence, so I go to the store, right? That actually says I go to the store, but if I were to add a subordinating conjunction, since I go to the store, this is a sentence unto itself. I go to the store. That's cool. Subject, verb, object. But if I put since, that is now subordinating, in other words, putting it down into a dependent clause. That is no longer an independent clause that can stand by itself. In which case, I need to, if I'm going to combine that dependent clause, I need an independent clause to attach it to, which means I combine a dependent clause and an independent clause with a comma. If it was just I go to the store, comma, and I buy shoes, that would be 2 independent clauses. But a subordinating conjunction turns an independent clause into a dependent clause. And then we have a dominant clause, which is the main idea of a sentence. And one of the things the SAT does, it messes around with what we call emphasis shift. What's the main point? So you got to think through, especially in combining sentences, and I'll show you how this works on the test itself. What's the main idea? Is the subject acting on the verb, because that's what subjects do. Subjects do things. The verb is the thing it does, and the object is that upon which it acts. We want to make sure we're emphasizing that subject verb object relationship, and that operates in a couple different ways between dependent clauses and independent clauses as well. We want to use direct voice. That's part of being precise and concise. Use active verbs, so don't say Tuesdays are when I go. Say I go on Tuesdays. And so we want to avoid that passive voice. Okay, cool. So let's get into the test here and just see how this works. All right. So this one I have here is, this is the way I approach this. I look at the possible answers. I don't read the text yet. I look at the possible answers and say, okay, what are they asking me? So I got, and one thing we want to sometimes do is look at that one. If this was an honest test, because they're not honest, they're always trying to mess around with us, they would just have a blank here rather than putting in a wrong answer, possibly wrong answer, possibly right answer. So I like to think about that blank here up here as A, okay? And read it like this. Among other problems, Hersey noted, the reading material available to grade schoolers had a hard time competing with television, radio, something, comma, something other media for children's attention, okay? So don't get fooled into the wrong answer by reading a wrong answer while you do this. But in any case, let's look back on this and say, okay, what are they measuring here? So the first thing I want to do is identify the subject and the verb and object of this sentence. Among other problems, so that's background information, that's a dependent clause. Hersey noted, okay, so problems he noted. So this is my, look for my verbs here. The reading material, which reading material available to school children, had a hard time. So the subject is reading material, the verb is had what? Had a hard time. Had a hard time doing what? Competing with television, comma, radio, comma, and other media for children's attention. Okay, so I know using my grammar rules and with and also and competing with. So looking here, remember I'm looking for concise and precise language. I want to look for my easy eliminations. So hard time competing. I have that word competing. We don't need it. So I get rid of D because we're just being what we call redundancy. We're unnecessarily repeating words. So the reading material had a hard time competing with television, radio, and also, we could say that, had a hard time competing with television, radio, and also other media. That's just kind of wordy. And then notice how B and C are saying the same thing. That's synonymous. Therefore, they're both wrong. So I'm left with A. And then it makes sense now because I realize I'm just giving a list here, comma, television, radio, and this is our correct answer here, other media for children's attention. Hope that makes sense. We already did number 2. We did that from the title alone, so I'll skip it. Let's look at number 3. So I look at here and I go, okay, Spalding, comma, no comma there. Spalding, the director, no punctuation. Spalding, comma, the director, comma, Spalding, dash, the director. So I know if I have a dash, it's either going to work like a colon, which means it has to have an independent clause, or it has to have another dash in order to be parenthetical. So let's just go ahead and eliminate the dash. That's the easy one. So first thing I do is look, is there another dash in this question, in this sentence? No other dash. Therefore, the dash is not working parenthetically because we need a dash, open dash, like open comma, parentheses and close parentheses. So that's not happening. So it's not acting as a parenthetical phrase. So if it's acting like a colon, because dashes can be parentheses or colons, then I need an independent clause before it. So do we have an independent clause here? The story of the Cat in the Hat publication began when, and by the way, that's a requisite phrase there, William Spalding, subject, read verb. Now notice I got a comma here that's not underlined, but I notice my subject, Spalding, read. I cannot separate well, hold on, we're eliminating the dash here, so let's do this first. So William Spalding, dash. This would not be began when I need to carry on my sentence, so it's wrong because the dash is operating like a colon. It can't be correct, okay? So let's get rid of D. Now we have a couple of things. Let's clear this up a little bit here. All right, when Spalding, comma, the director of the Education Division publication. Oh, I notice I have a comma here Is this being parenthetical? If it is, then I need that comma here, and I need the comma here. So I'm leaning towards A. But what about Spalding the director? Well, the problem with Spalding the director is that it give me a comma that I can't change. And I know that I can separate a subject from a verb by 2 commas, which are acting like parentheses, but I cannot separate them with 1 comma. Therefore, Spalding the director, and then we got this comma here, would separate my subject from the verb. That's incorrect. So get rid of that one. And then this one does the same thing, comma, comma, comma. I cannot separate a subject from a verb by 3 commas. Therefore, by default, I go with A, which is Spalding parenthetical, who was he? The director of the division, blah, blah, blah. He read Hersey's article. Spalding read. Therefore, I go with A. Okay, cool. Now we have this type of question here. We're combining sentences at the underline spot. Okay, so we have to look for those sentences here. Spalding agreed there was a need for appealing books for beginning readers. Okay, he thought he knew. I'm going to read these two now before I look at the possible answers, because I just want to see what I'm going for. Usually I read these first. But okay, so cool. So I got Spalding agreed, and he thought he knew who should write one. A couple things I want to think. So what are they measuring here? Okay, can I combine 2 independent clauses with a comma and a conjunction? Sure, that works. I have that. Can I use that dash? Remember, dashes work like a colon or they work like parentheses. There's no other dash here, so it has to be working as a parentheses. So Spalding agreed that there was a need for appealing books for readers. Oh, that works because I have an independent clause here. That's okay. But then I look at this word here, namely. Why do I need to? That's kind of redundant. A couple of things. That's kind of like a 100% rule. Get rid of the word namely and being, which are really vague. B-E-I-N-G. These are vague words that are just kind of what they consider imprecise and inconcise. So you want to get rid of that entirely. Then I have a semicolon and. Now, a semicolon is a conjunction. So why would I need another conjunction after semicolon? So I want to get rid of that one on spec. Comma and. Oh, meanwhile. Again, that's wordy. So just using, they're not really measuring my ability to combine 2 independent clauses. They're really measuring my ability to use concise language here. So I'm going for the most precise, concise one, which is about 80% of the time the correct answer, the shortest one. Sometimes that's not correct because there's a grammatical mistake in the way, but if it's not a grammar error, which will sometimes happen when there's a comparison that requires a parallel, what we call parallel construction in comparisons. We'll go over that when we see it. But generally, 80% of the time, the shortest answer is the correct answer. One of the 20% of the times is when there are 2 short answers that can't both be correct. Okay, moving on. Now we have to support the information that follows in the sentence. Sometimes they'll say in the paragraph or in the next paragraph. Make sure you're reading this carefully. So just forget what this says here, blah, blah, blah. What's the rest of the sentence? Geisel was an experienced writer and illustrator. Okay, so whatever this says, it's got to support, and in this case, I don't need to worry about going back to a prior paragraph. I could consider that because remember, topic sentence are combining 2 separate paragraphs, so we need to connect the paragraphs here. But in any case, they're just telling us what we have to do here. Best supports the information that follows in the sentence. What follows in the sentence? He was an experienced writer and illustrator. So, having known Spalding for many years, does that support that he was an experienced illustrator? No, just that some dude knew him, so it can't be A. And they acquired a reputation for, no, it's got nothing to do with perfectionism. Notice how I can focus on one word and get rid of it. Politics, get rid of it. So I'm going to eliminate down to D. And whether or not I like D, I've eliminated A, B, and C, so it's got to be D. Published 9 books. Oh, okay, so he was an experienced writer, so he wrote 9 books, blah, blah, blah. Okay, all good on that one. It's pretty easy. By the way, this is a pretty easy passage, so make sure you're clear that we're not doing a high level of difficulty here. All right, now one thing I like to do on these transition words is get rid of the A and write it down here. However, don't read it in here because we're going to prejudice our view of these sentences by reading the transition word that may or may not be correct. Now, another way to, when I look at these, I have however, for example, furthermore, and at any rate. However is a negative. It's a contrast. I'm going to put that negative there. For example, is supporting, so I'm going to put a positive. Furthermore is supporting. At any rate is kind of like, well, yes, but. So it's kind of supporting, but. So when I look at these two sentences, and by the way, I'm going to read the correct answer from before into it. So having published 9 children's books, blah, blah, blah. Giesel was an experienced writer and illustrator. This new project presented him with an obstacle. Okay, so he was an experienced educator, and he ran into an obstacle. Running into an obstacle is supporting that an example of being an experienced educator? No, it's not. Is it adding information to him? No. Tells us nothing more about him being an experienced writer and illustrator, and it's not like at any rate, and you might say, you know, well, yes, but is one way to look upon that. No, that doesn't do it. So it's definitely contrasting. He was an experienced writer. However, this new project, we're doing a contrast here between the two. All right, number 7. We're dealing here with what I want to do is always look for how are these similar, how are they different? An image, an image, an image, an image. Okay, so I want to make sure I'm using active voice, subject and verb. So the subject is the one acting on the verb and the verb is acting on the object. Okay, this is called emphasis shift. So I want to make sure I'm saying who's doing the acting on what. So on the verb giving up, comma, and notice I always read punctuation. Geisel's story finally hit upon. Okay, so my subject here is Geisel's, so he's possessing the story. So this is my subject. The story hit. Well, stories don't hit, so it can't be that, right? Geisel hit upon it. An image that Geisel hit upon, that's passive voice. I want to avoid that. Geisel, subject, finally hit. Subject, verb, object. So I'm going to go with C. Let's just eliminate D. The story was finally based on an image that he hit upon. That's passive voice again. So we definitely go with C here, which is the active voice of Geisel hit upon an image. And then we have this one, number 8, at the end of a duration of 9 long months. At the end of a duration, we're dealing here with redundancies. Again, concise and precise language. So after we don't need to tell the reader what 9 months is or 36 weeks. After a line had elapsed, that's wordy. This is the shortest one. It's usually the right one. At the end of a duration in line, it's all wordy, so we just go with D. That's an easy question. They just want to make sure you're getting that right, so you don't completely fail this test. But this is a generally easy passage, so we're getting more easier questions. This could be complicated in a more difficult passage. So we're dealing with redundancies here and unnecessary language. All right, last 3 questions. We already did 11. Let's look at this. So I look here, I got is, was, has been, delete the underlined portion. So I'm looking for these 2 words between is and was is verb tense, right? Has been, oh, verb tense. Okay, so maybe it's about verb tense. So let's see if it's about verb tense. Children were entertained. Okay, so if it's were, it can't be has been because we have to have a parallel construction of verb tense. I can't say I go to the store and bought. I have to say I went to the store and bought, right? We have to maintain verb tense in a parallel fashion. So children were entertained by its plot about the antics of a mischievous cat, or if you don't know that word, skip it, say something cat. And is, well, here I can go, is singular, children is plural, so I want to get rid of age simply for children were entertained, and also was, because this is in the present tense, get rid of it. Children were entertained, and were, children were, we need to be parallel in a construction here. Has been doesn't meet that parallel, but so I look at, so why would I delete this? Well, wait a minute. Subject, children, verb, were entertained by its plot about the antics of a mischievous cat, and captivated, were entertained, were captivated. That's parallel construction of verbs. I've got children were entertained, children were captivated. That's subject, verb, verb. Make sure these 2 verbs are working in parallel construction, as we say. All right, number 10 here. So I see a semicolon, a comma, a dash, and down here a period. So I know I must have an independent clause before maybe a dash, certainly before a semicolon, and certainly before a period. So in the years that followed, not an independent clause. So it can't be that, can't be that, can't be that, unless there's another dash, but there's no other dash in this. So it's definitely not acting parenthetically, it's acting like a colon. So I just eliminate down to C. And what we have here is a dependent clause followed by an independent clause, which is combined by a comma. So that one's easy enough to get rid of, okay? And then we already did 11. All right, let's see if this next one is a little bit more difficult here. I'll just go through this. Keep student volunteering voluntary, process that. What are they saying? So kind of a play on words here, but volunteering should be voluntary. Okay, cool. All right, let's go through it. Number 12. Such volunteering, so I'm looking at this, to pick up litter, litter collection, picking up litter. I guess this word usage, because these are all doing the same thing grammatically, right? They all have a comma, comma, comma. So this is not a grammar question. So I got to look at this and go, okay, so what are they looking for? They want me to focus on what's going on here. And the key is that such volunteering, be it helping at a local animal shelter, helping, this is about parallel structure, picking up, helping, picking up litter, or working. So I need to use that parallel structure. So we get rid of those, go right on the correct one. Now we go transitioning from a previous paragraph that highlights the criticism of compulsory volunteering mentioned in the previous paragraph. So we need to stick to that information they give us about, well, how do we get to connecting these two paragraphs here? This first paragraph talks about how, it just gives us a setup, so it's good for kids to volunteer, right? But critics say that making volunteerism compulsory misses the point. We're going to transition into the next one here. This throws some kids a lot, but in any case, so whatever the work may be, it's not about the type of volunteering. They don't get into that. It'd be redundant to say for many students, and fortunately, and it's not about the communities that need it. So we can eliminate down to A, but notice how what A does is, by its definition, volunteer work is done willingly. That is supporting the idea that volunteerism that is compulsory misses the point of the act, okay? Number 14, I look at this. Okay, here we didn't do possessive form. So a noun possesses a noun. If it's a plural noun, it possesses with the apostrophe after the S. If it's a single noun, it possesses it before the S. The only thing that can get in between a noun and a noun possessing is an adjective. So I could do Steve's shoes, or the boys, plural, red shoes, Steve's red shoes. But I cannot possess a verb. I cannot possess anything but a noun. So when I look at these, officials are taking away students and students. So here I just need to eliminate based upon whether it's singular or plural. And looking at this one here, by requiring students to do community service in order to graduate, school officials are taking away students. Okay, by requiring students, so it's got to be plural. So it can't be this. So can I possess students' choice? Can students possess choice? Sure they can. But what about this one? Officials taking away students' choice. The key here is understanding that the word students is a determinant. It's a particular thing. So it's not acting as a what we call a modifier. I could have the noun student define choice, right? What kind of choice? Student's choice. It can't be student's choice, so I have to be the students possessing the choice. So I get rid of B, it's got to be D here. Moving on here, just looking at this one, using our rule of the shortest one is usually the right one 80% of the time. Is it, well, advocating, volunteering, proponents? Oh, proponents. They already advocate. Who are in favor of the advocate. So simply down to this number C here. 16, supporting example that is most similar to the examples already in the sentence. So what's in the sentence? Students who volunteer report increased self-esteem, better relationship buildings, and increasingly busy schedules. So we have to support this is parallel construction of examples. Students volunteer the increase esteem, relationship building. No, it's not about their busy schedules. It could be a closer connection with the community. Let's not eliminate that. Less time. No, it's about them getting better at things. A little increase in academic achievement. So we got to go with B here. It's the only one that's giving us a positive example, consistent with his self-esteem, relationship building, blah, blah, blah. And then 17. Now here, this is a little bit tricky here. Just a quick rule. The word affect, I want you to treat that as a verb. The word effect, I want you to treat that as a noun. The word effect can be a verb, but in this test purposes, I've never seen it being used as a verb. So if you see an affect, it's a verb, effect is a noun. So we need to look at the sentence and say, do we need a verb or a noun here? Some studies have also found that students who do, by the way, requisite phrase, who do community service are more likely to volunteer, and thus we need a verb here. So we're going to get rid of A because it's not a verb, and thus this is a subject. Affecting, no, we can't do subject affecting. Affects, okay, so we have affect and affect. What is the difference between those? Well, it's the case, right? I affect, you affect, he affects. They affect, affect. So students affect, so it's B. So we're using the plural here to match with the verb affect. Hope that makes sense to you. Lastly, here we have vocab. Just think about the type of vocabulary that we're working. If it's coercive, you're forcing. Oh, these are synonymous, aren't they? They're probably wrong because they're synonymous because they can't both be correct. So I look at mandatory and then imperative. If you don't know what imperative is, I think they've been using the word mandatory before, or at least they've been using a synonym, compulsory, which is synonymous with mandatory. So we go with mandatory on 18. Finally, these last two, I've got a semicolon, I got a period, I got a semicolon, and I got a comma and a, oh, look what I got here. For these to be correct, I have to do an independent clause. So do we have an independent clause? She found that students who were required to volunteer rushed to complete their service in early high school. That's an independent clause. That's cool. So I can't eliminate B, C, or D. But I can eliminate A because I need a conjunction here. I got a comma and I'm missing a conjunction. So A, since I have two independent clauses, they then did significant blah, blah. So that's an independent clause. I have an independent clause on this side. I get rid of A because I need a conjunction here, which we don't have. So the question becomes then, do I need to use a semicolon, a period, separating two sentences, and they then? I see they then. Let's they, comma, then. Remember, a subject cannot be separated from a verb by a comma. So I have they, comma, then. So they, verb, subject, verb. It can't be that because that's subject, verb that gets in the way. They then, comma, I eliminate down to D. And then this last one here, then the service hours of those. This one is one of those examples where we're dealing with the comparisons. We want to be careful on this. Comparisons need to have a parallel structure. So if you compare one things, we say she found that students who were required to volunteer rushed to complete the service in early high school. They then did. So when I compare they then did to those who did, those then the service hours of those who did not. So we need to use that word did, and that's only in this one B, because this one, although it's shorter, is wrong because it's grammatically incorrect because I need to have a parallel construction with they did, then did the students here. Okay, two more here. Sorry about that. Effectively sets up the points made in the next sentence. So it's, in the next sentence. So cool. The next sentence says, studies show that schools simply tell students about opportunities and connect with organizations that need help. Students volunteer of their own free will. Okay, remember, I'm going to stick to my title here. These are my concluding. Keep volunteering voluntary. So I want to make sure I'm keeping consistent with that title. And where are we? 21. Here we go. Many studies show, okay, instead of requiring students to volunteer, schools have to recognize that all students are equally well suited. It's not about that. It's about keeping volunteering voluntary. Should allow students to spend their time participating. No, it's not about athletics. Focus on offering arrangements that make volunteering. Yes, that's the one, because that's keeping volunteering voluntary. That's what they want us to do. And then we can get rid of this one, their ability. It's not about that. And the same thing here on 22, just stick to the one that is keeping volunteering voluntary. Imperative schools do their part to find volunteers for many worth. No, it's not about the worthwhile organizations. More engaged into that require volunteer work. That's probably it. Studies in fields of, no, it's not about psychology. Important that students choose charitable work. No, it's not about what they do. They're just talking about volunteering in general. Okay. I hope this is helpful. I think these were two fairly easy passages, but the rules are clear there. Identify subject, verb, object, look for the punctuation, read out that punctuation out loud so you know what you're reading. If you see a comma that's not underlined, that comma is there. So is that acting parenthetically? Is it separating a dependent clause from an independent clause, and so on and so forth? And the logic, I think, also follows a lot of rules. It's just got to be consistent with the emphasis of the sentence, be consistent with what the title is telling you it does. So pay attention to those titles. Okay, guys, hope this helps. Good luck.